It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey Not the Face with your host John Nash and your producer me, Steffi Haynes. And today we are going to talk Dana White quite a bit. We're also going to talk about brand risk and still a little bit of MVP news because we have lots and lots of things that just continually evolve from MVP's past MMA event. And we're going to talk about Oleksandr Usyk and Rico Verhoeven as sort of MVP adjacent. We're even going to talk about some UFC antitrust cases. Updates. Now, we realize we've only given you one show this week, but that is because John has been traveling. He is back home with family, and so we decided to just do one show this week because it was too hard on both of us to kind of make our schedules work out. So, smart people out there will pick up a paid subscription because each one of our shows is divided into two parts. There's a free section that's the first half of the show is free. The second half of the show is behind a paywall. So if you want access to all of it, you got to pick up a paid subscription. But the great news is it's not a whole lot. It's just $5 a month. Now, John, you are home. How the heck are you?
I am, home being I'm with my mom's place out in Minnesota. So I'm not back home in LA. I'm out here. I'm good. My older brother's here. We're rotating, watching my mom. So it's nice to be in Minnesota in the summer. It's nice, sunny, warm out here for once compared to the winter when I was here, the dreadful winter that I want to forget. So everything's going good. And I want to know one thing you brought up. I noticed last time we did episode, we're going to be talking about Dana White a lot. That kind of killed our viewers that week, the number of viewers. So I got a feel of the idea that I just want to make it clear to everybody. I think there was one person, Ed Nosey, is that he's the one person who wants more to go deep dive into Dana White. We're not doing that. If you're scared off of us talking about Dana White, really what we're going to do is going to talk about all the stuff Dana White talked about or brought up or the media talked about, and then break it down and analyze it. And I also want to point out for people that don't have a subscription, I think later in the show, we are going to do a breakdown into UFC contracts about a certain subject that keeps being brought up. And I don't think anybody else has gone as deep, as clear as I'm going to go. And so if you're interested in that subject about the contractual obligations of the UFC to offer fighters fights, which gets brought up all the time, know a few people from other MMA sites. This is some free content for you to steal from us and if you subscribe. So we have that going for us today.
And you should link back to us if you're going to thief our work.
Well, I think the people that do subscribe and would do that, they're kind enough to cite us.
All right. So let's get down to brass tacks. Are there any updates to the UFC and or WWE antitrust cases?
Oh my God, I'm frozen now. I'm freezing up because I forgot to do any research or any preparation for the show. But yes, there was. Now I recall. There was one court document only. So it's been a slow holiday weekend. The document that came out over the weekend, I believe it actually came out Tuesday, right after the holiday, was the court minutes document from the May 18th status conference. And so it gave us a summary of what was talked about. Now, we've discussed this already. We've talked about, I could not get Alessandro Gelki on the show, who's supposed to. We couldn't get our schedule together, but we talked about notes that he shared, what happened. But this is good because it gives us a general, probably a better summary of what happened. So what that summary was, I'll just really quickly summarize it. The document itself, the minutes from the meeting, there's 4 cases that were discussed that day. And those 4 cases are the Johnson v. Zuffa case, the main potential class action they're seeking class action for. The Davis v. Zuffa case, where Phil Davis is asking for injunctive relief. The case called Constantino v. Zuffa. This is the one where the customers, the fans, are suing the UFC for having a watered down product on their pay-per-views before they left ESPN. And then the final suit that was on it as attached is the Johnson v. Zuffa Florida transfer, and that relates to front row management. So those are the 4 cases. Now, the main issue they discussed was the evidence spoliation issue. The bulk of the hearing apparently was focused on spoliation proceedings. This means the case is investigating whether Zuffa TKO and related defendants, related being Endeavor, destroyed or failed to preserve evidence. And of course, if everybody listens, knows this is a very serious matter that can result in significant sanctions. And I bring up Post Wrestling has an article about the WWE case that is looking for that same thing, sanctions, basically calling for any future trial to judge in favor of the plaintiffs against the WWE because they destroyed significant evidence. And then they also discussed Dana White's devices. And so the court had ordered Zuffa to determine whether an Apple device linked to Dana White has an iCloud account that retained messages. Zuffa's counsel had until May 19th, so this has already passed. I don't know the exact results of this yet, to report its findings. Then they also had discussions about Hunter Campbell's devices. The court had ordered Zuffa to produce devices, or I should say device extractions collected by Holo Discovery for Hunter Campbell's devices. They also had comments about Ari Emanuel's devices. Endeavor, the UFC parent company, or was the UFC parent company, was ordered to determine whether they still have Ari Emanuel's previous devices, and if so, obtain full extractions. The court appointed an expert. A forensic expert named Eric Whedon was examined by the court about his findings. He was ordered to submit a final report by June 1st, 2026. Hopefully that's available to us. And then 2 e-collection vendors were also examined. And so then the other cases we mentioned, the Constantino case, this is a putative class action that overlaps with the other cases. The court ordered the Constantino parties to appear at the next status conference to discuss whether to consolidate with the other cases and whether to participate in the spoliation proceedings, which is interesting because this case, again, the Constantino case is representing fans suing the UFC. I find it very tenuously linked to the Johnson v. Zuffa case. The other case is all about fighters and monopsony charges. This is a true, basically monopoly charge where they abuse the fans or the pricing. So there's that difference. The one thing, though, is that so much discovery probably overlaps. It does kind of make sense to merge them together for now. So we might have a lot more attorneys showing up. We had a lot before, almost all mostly from the defendant side, because now they have so many different defendants and they split up. But we might have a whole new round of attorneys showing up for these lawsuits. And as I mentioned, we laughed at that suit a little bit, but it has been pointed out to me that the attorneys representing the plaintiffs are a serious, legitimate, top-notch firm. So they have that going for them. Finally, there's the first round management. They had their separate subpoena with a dispute involving first round management and the fighters, and they were ordered to meet and confer with the plaintiffs to resolve those disputes. And so we have a long list of upcoming deadlines. We already passed the deadline for Dana White's iCloud account. We have a June 1st expert report due from Whedon. June 3rd is the next status conference, and then a big one. 3 days have been set aside, June 30th to July 2nd. For the full spoliation hearing, where the court will examine defendants' custodians and determine whether sanctions are appropriate. So that's a big one. I should note one other interesting little tidbit. There was this discussion about trying to find out why Zuffa had named their iPhones the way they did, because I guess it looked a little suspicious, as we brought up last week, that they named one of the iPhones Holo, which is the name of the company they're supposed to hand them over for extraction. So that got raised as well.
Wow. So there was quite a bit there that you were able to break down on the fly.
Yes.
So when do you think we'll have updates on that May 19th thing?
I do not know for sure. I am guessing at the very least we should have it by the next status conference, June 3rd, at the very least. But I will be on the lookout. Also, it's very likely, very possible, there are several documents that have been sealed in the case. There have been motions to seal. And so they might be on Pacer, but unavailable to us in the public. So we will have to keep an eye out for either something being filed or looking for something else that mentions that that's been sealed and it's unavailable to us.
All right, let's move on. This next round of questions is going to be about MVP. Now, we talked last week about possible matchups MVP could do to maximize a second MMA card. After watching Rico Verhoeven versus Oleksandr Usyk, what are your thoughts on that now?
Well, one, I had a thought is it was good of Verhoeven, I should not to take the Ngannou fight, but that really kind of hurt the Rousey card. Not that the mainstream public would have made a big deal about Rico versus Ngannou, the casual fan. But there have been, I think, stronger interest from the hardcore fan, and that would have bleed over to the coverage and bleed over to interest. And so there had been a fight that had a lot more intrigue instead of being, like way over the hill fighters or, Ronda and Gina Carano was kind of this nostalgia factor fight. And that would have added a lot to that card. I think that would have, viewership numbers were probably really hurt because Ronda Rousey finished Gina and so quickly. If that, if she was smart, if she was, if she wants to be the promotion, the Dana White, the MVP, well, she should have carried Gina for like 3 rounds because they probably would have blown past 20 million in viewers if she'd done that. But just having Ngannou versus Rico probably would have added 1 to 2 million viewership because it would have just started off earlier in the card, much more intrigue. That's just my kind of guess here. Not that Rico, again, is a big star. It just would have brought more attention inside combat sports and been considered much more legitimate. Now, his number one priority, obviously, is to get a rematch with Usyk. That might not happen right away because there's some pushback. But I think that the option B that a lot of people are talking about is him boxing Ngannou. Now, for the MMA side, this kind of hurts because you lost the possibility. I shouldn't say you've lost it. You've actually entered another possibility that is not for MMA, and that is Ngannou boxing Rico. And that's, I think that would actually draw. You might have to put a solid fight with it, but I think there'd be interest in that now, especially amongst combat sports guys. And again, it would generate unearned media because you would have to pay. The coverage on the websites would generate more attention and more interest, so do better ratings. So they have that possibility. There's also the possibility you offer Rico more money or whatever, and you can still put on an MMA event with those two, and that could somewhat draw. And so both those possibilities are on the table.
There's a third, though. There's a third.
The third, I would say, is Rob Joyner's idea is to have a boxing ring there next to a cage, or have some systems up to show
hybrid,
and do an MMA show, and then bring out the boxing main event of Ngannou versus Usyk. That is a third. That's a strong possibility. Now, the thing is, MVP does both boxing and MMA events. So would it make more sense for him to put together a boxing card with that if he wanted to be the one to promote it, or to make more sense just to attach an MMA card beneath that? I mean, both possibilities are available. I don't think MVP is committed to doing either sport for Netflix. Their whole thing is which one will draw the most eyeballs, and get us the most money. And so they'll make a decision on that. But they have options now, possibly, if Usyk and Rico are not made immediately as the follow-up match.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, Rob Joyner, I'm glad that you're seeing my point because I made it first. Remember, when we were first talking about this, what did I say? They could do a hybrid card with having a boxing match on the MMA card. Do you remember that?
Yeah, and I think I crapped on it and shot it down. So we don't need to remember that. I think we deleted that episode. So.
So I'm glad that Rob Joyner at least has faith in my ideas because my bestie over here certainly doesn't. Now, let's talk a little bit more about what they can do for their next MMA event or hybrid event. Because Ronda Rousey, despite saying that one fight with Gina was all she was going to do, is now angling for a rematch with Holly Holm. And she said that MVP and or Netflix needs to pony up the money because she wants the rematch with Holly Holm. My question for you is, how well do you think that fight would do as a main event on MVP's next MMA card?
Well, first, I missed the part where she said they had to pony up, because the quote I saw earlier, and she might have elaborated on that since then. What I saw earlier was her talking about how she would kill Holly Holm, but she's going to stay retired. And which is the Weasleyest thing possibly to do. The idea that, I would win the rematch, but it's never going to happen. So, but if she's saying they have to pony up, and that's obviously a strong possibility, because, she seems very mercenary, which one of the traits I actually like about her. Not some of the others I don't, but that one I do appreciate. If that's the case, that would be a big hit for MVP. In fact, I'm not saying she's doing this, but if she needs ideas, she wants a position in an MVP in the future, some sort of executive. One way to possibly get is hold out the possibility of her rematching Holly Holm in the future on MVP, only if there's a post job attached to it. Because that's how much leverage she would have. And that fight, Holly Holm versus Ronda Rousey, would do better. I think would get more interest and do better than Gina Carano. Not because, again, Ronda Rousey hasn't fought for a long time, but now she has a quick win that's reminded everybody of, what she did. Holly Holm has been more relevant sooner than Gina Carano. There is I shouldn't say there's unfinished business, because Holly Holm beat the shit out of her and I think dominated that entire fight. But in a lot of people's mind, they've been waiting for that rematch to see if it could be repeated. All those issues together, I think, create this as a much more intriguing fight for a lot of people. A lot more of the less casual fans that were not particularly excited by Rousey taking on someone that had been out of the fight business so long, and also fans that are more casual, because as big a star as Carano kind of was women's combat sports, Holly Holm was the person that beat her in the ring in a UFC event that was sold like 1 million pay-per-views. She is, I think, more casuals that have tuned into UFC events know her better than they did Gina Carano. So that fight would generate, millions upon millions more in audience, I believe, than the last one did, especially that, one good, two good co-main events. I shouldn't say that. I hate when they say, there's 3 main events. There's no 3 main events, but it had an undercard bout or a co-main. That bout could do, serious numbers. Over 20. This one I would feel very confident would get past 20 million.
I misread the comment, because Adam Martin, that I cited from heavy.com, he put underneath it, MVP MMA needs to open up the checkbook and make it happen. And I misread that as Ronda saying it. So that's on me. That's on me right there. But you gotta think, though, that if they did pony up, Ronda would come to the table. Ronda's not dumb. Ronda's not dumb. And if the money was right, I absolutely believe that Ronda would come to the table for that fight.
I kind of think, but at the same time, I think it's Ronda has a very different mentality than most people. She's not a normal person, as someone that's been raised to armbar other people in the household at a very young age. And I think she is haunted by the fact of how she exited the UFC, and that she is tormented by the fact that she has 2 losses, that it really drives her nuts. And part of this was done not just to make money, but to exit on a win and kind of pretend that she never lost. Now, I think it's possible. I think you're right. Like I said just a few minutes ago, she's kind of a mercenary in some ways, but it would take a sizable amount of money, and maybe they have that, for her to fight Holly Holm. I think that would, and will they do it? Does it make financial sense? That's the question.
All right. Now, last question on this. I got to ask you how you feel Netflix's position right now as far as MVP MMA is concerned. or MVP in general. It doesn't even have to be the MMA side. Just where do you think they're at in their thinking as far as MVP goes?
Well, for Netflix, I think there was an interesting article that was written by a former, what was the Karate Combat executive, Adam Kovacs. Okay. Same last name as a friend of mine. I don't know why I keep forgetting it. And that actually was a really good article, and I recommend it to people. Now, there's a caveat, a warning. I got to put that out. That article. Adam is in combat sports. He is obviously trying to set up a future venture. So some of it's probably written in a way that serves as a service to whatever future combat sports venture he's trying to do. So it's something of an advertisement. But a central argument is that MMA may be the cheapest large-scale attention available in sports available, I should say, and major money and media are finally catching on to that. That's his argument, that it's if you want to get into the sports business, which everybody in streaming wants to, because that guarantees you a large audience, it costs a fortune based on getting the NFL, which gives you a massive audience. And for other sports, often you have to pay a ton for a smaller audience. It just doesn't seem worth it. So he argues that the industry is hitting a tipping point right now. That is combat sports, because Netflix and others are finding out how big these events are. I guess the other example is Paramount with UFC, and that the numbers are huge, and it's, it can be cheaper because it's combat sports, but also it's a one-off, so you're paying for that one event, and you can guarantee you get a massive rating without having to dish out a full season's worth. And so he has key signals he points to what's happening, kind of demonstrating why this is happening. He points out Scott Coker, Strikeforce, Bellator fame. He just got $60 million raised for his new MMA promotion, and then one of the investors is Tony Hawk, this kind of cultural, not just a famous skateboarder, but kind of a cultural figure. And so the Kovacs sees this as a signal that it's a cultural mainstream signal as well, not just a sports bet, that Tony Hawk is getting in it because he thinks it has much wider appeal. He points out the UFC White House event, which reportedly is costing $60 million plus for the show. They say it's going to lose $30 million, which we've discussed endlessly. That doesn't seem to be accurate if you really add up the numbers. But something, he points out, this would have been unimaginable a decade ago. We could not have a White House event. That just shows you where we are in combat sports, how we're at this tipping point. And then he brings up the Aiden Ross. I'm not familiar with this influencer, but it was all over Twitter over the weekend. He talks about the UFC hosted boxing event they had at the UFC Apex. And he sees that as a deliberate strategy to pull new audience into the sport sober. So that's the evidence he has. And so his next insight is that the recent MMA card, it drew, whatever, I think it was 17 million was the number that they reported. And his key point is that while everybody argued about who won the event, was it Netflix, was it UFC or MVP, that they missed the bigger story, that Netflix may have stumbled onto something remarkable in combat sports, that this was almost accidental, that MMA offered massive reach at a fraction of the cost because the IP isn't locked up yet, and there's no controlling cartel over the rights. That's his argument. All that sounds great, but I am going to throw a little water on that fire. That describes, I think, more boxing than MMA, because the problem of his argument, and this applies to MVP specifically, is MVP can put on these Netflix events and draw massive numbers, but they need specific fighters. And how many fighters are available? How many bouts can be put together that would draw the type of spectacle, put on the type of spectacle event that could draw tens of millions of people, which Netflix is looking for? Very few. And almost all of the fighters that could possibly do it are locked up in the UFC. The only ones that are not are very aged. Again, Ronda Rousey, Nate Diaz, who had a loss and is losing his shine. Jake Paul himself, if he wants to get in a fight. Francis Ngannou has no dance partners. So it's a very limited number roster of fighters that are available that could potentially put on a big fight outside the UFC. But they cannot, mostly can't do it because those fighters have maybe one or two fights left in their career that they can do this. And they're going to retire instead of getting beat up all the time, or that the fans will lose interest. The only way it works really is kind of with the UFC building fighters up. I mean, UFC couldn't do it 12 times a year, these numbers, but they could spend the effort and build a few fighters up and put on a Netflix type event. And we can see that right now. They have John Jones. They have Tom Aspinall. We have Fran Ngannou out there. We have Alex Pereira. Those four could make a series of massive fights that would work on Netflix. But no one could do that because they're tied up to the UFC. And we're in this interesting situation where Netflix apparently is willing to spend tons of money to put on these big spectacles. MVP is willing to take that money and spend the vast majority of it on the fighters so they could make tens of millions of dollars. And yet the fighters that could benefit from that, they can't go cash that Netflix check because they're withheld from the market because they are signed to the UFC.
Now, you mentioned that other influencer thing that UFC was linked to over the weekend, and that is called brand risk. And that's Aiden Ross's promotion, but TKO is affiliated with Brand Risk. And it's basically a celebrity influencer-based promotion that right now is under fire for fight fixing. What are your thoughts on the limited amount of information that you have on Brand Risk?
The first time I heard of them was, I think, over the weekend, last weekend, when they had the bout and everybody talked about. I had no clue who these people are. You've been listening to the show long enough, I'm just not really into the freak show fights, the spectacles. I was not really into Carano versus Rousey. Only reason I'd watch it is mostly because Fran Ngannou was on it, and it was a free card. It was a simple thing to tune into. But Brand Risk, not grade B celebrities, grade C and D celebrities fighting it out. I just don't care. Maybe I'll see a clip on Twitter and I'll laugh, but this is the least talented combat I've ever seen in my life. And so I just don't have any interest in it. I'm sure other people do, but.
Well, I guess what I'm more asking is what you think of TKO's affiliation with this type of thing.
Well, it's kind of remarkable that Mark Shapiro just shit all over MVP, and yet they're tied and affiliated with a much poorer version than what MVP was supplying. I find that kind of intriguing. I also go back to my old Lopetamine quote from Blazing Saddles. It was not his quote to him, but Slim Pickings. What won't that asshole put his name on? And that kind of explains TKO and then they get involved in everything. They're involved in every sort of shit promotion event thing possible. I shouldn't say but they don't put their name on it, but they're connected to it, or tied to it, to collect some money. So it's not surprising to me that they see the success in influencer-based fighting. And I've talked to a lot of people. There's a lot of people trying to get involved in this. They see a value and money to extract in it. None of them really think it's going to last forever, more than, but it's lasted this far. And they see that there's money involved. So I'm not shocked that TKO, through connection or whatever, didn't want to put their full name on it, didn't want to pretend it's part of the roster of UFC, WWE, and now Zuffa Boxing, their premier sports. But I'm not surprised that they got some involvement with it because they get to cash in now on just sleazy celebrity fights without tarnishing the brand at the same time.
Yeah, and Aiden Ross is the one that Dana White has been buddied up with for the last 3 or 4 years. He and Aiden are thick as thieves, and Aiden is probably the most popular influencer out there aside from Jake Paul. So
is Aiden Ross like a particular scumbag? Because yes. I cannot remember. Yes. Okay.
Yes, he is.
That kind of, yes. Okay. Good.
They
to know.
all
Good
are,
to know. Yeah.
But Aiden Ross is definitely a scumbag.
On the spectrum of just kind of a scumbag to a complete scumbag.
Complete scumbag.
Okay, I just want to know what the level of scumbag we're dealing with.
And he's also the one that Dana White routinely clears his gambling debts for him. Gave him $250,000 for his birthday one year. He has a brother too, and he gave his brother a bunch of money for his birthday. He routinely just hands these guys money. So there's also that aspect of the relationship as well. It's very transactional. Like, old man Dana gets to hang out with these young hip influencers as long as things keep going sunny side up for the influencers. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's remarkable that he has anything in common with these people, but yeah, he hangs
exactly.
Out. Good. Good for him.
60-year-old Dana is well on his way to being Campbell McLaren with the looks of things. All right, so let's move on because from here on, we're going to talk UFC stuff. Now, it has been reported that Conor McGregor wanted his comeback fight to be against Michael Chandler, but that UFC said it, quote, didn't make sense for them. Now, I gotta know, has Conor's leverage with the company sort of dried up, evaporated, what have you?
Well, yes, pretty much. I mean, he never had that much leverage. I think there were some moments when he had some leverage over the company. Namely, his big moment was after the sale. You could see the sale documents, the lending document stuff. The UFC had concern about paying off the debt because they had not gotten the new ESPN deal yet. They had sold it for $4 billion. I think Endeavor used at the time WME had taken out $2.8 billion in debt to pay for it, and so there was high interest rates. I shouldn't say high interest, but there's high payments when you put together. The UFC was not making nearly as much at the time, again because they were on the old Fox TV deal. And so there was concern that they were kind of at risk that they might not be able to afford the payments on the interest, and they could run into trouble until they got the new ESPN deal. And that's where Conor had leverage because he was the number one guy at generating revenue. That's probably one of the reasons why that, in addition to the potential threats or the hinted threats that Conor McGregor laid out where he would go get a boxing license and then challenge his contract, that's one of the reasons probably why they broke down and let Conor McGregor box and ended up being a great deal for the UFC. But at the time, they were very resistant. And then you add up that he's threatening to take this route that Sam Spiro supposedly drew together, and that the UFC and WME needs the UFC to make as much as possible so they can cover the interest payments. And this will just, they get to keep most of the money. So they'll get just a windfall from that. So they let him do the Mayweather fight, and that was one that was one time he had leverage. Then after that, they still needed fights from him, and they needed him on ESPN at the beginning, and so they kind of catered to him. But now, lo and behold, we are now Conor McGregor. As much as he's still the biggest star by far in UFC, he doesn't seem intent on re-signing with them. He's at the end of the road. His behavior is somewhat erratic, to say the least. His talent level is plummeted. He's not the star. So what to do with him? Give him Michael Chandler, who's also an aging fighter who might not be really any good anymore, or maximize it, put him against even a bigger star than Michael Chandler, a bigger fan favorite, and Max Holloway to make a bigger event, and pretty clearly, or most likely get his ass whooped. Because I think it seems very likely that Max is going to beat the crap out of him because Max has been and we've seen Max in recent years and take on legitimate opponents and look like he still has a lot to offer. And so you can cash out. I think the whole thing is if Conor McGregor is still going to show up to fight and not get an injury, well, he's going to fight out his contract. And his big leverage was when he only, they had changed his contract out without his agreement by getting rid of pay-per-view points. His only leverage was at that moment. And he's apparently agreed to fight out his contract. But his deal was that, they would compensate him for the loss of pay-per-view, and that the contract, they would have to give him his next fight before the end of the year so he could get out by the end of the year. That was his big, moment of leverage. And that's what he used it on. But what the UFC is going to probably, it looks like, going to do is going to give him his two big fights to help build up Paramount subscriptions and get his ass kicked twice, which might seriously damage his potential leaving the UFC. And so, has his leverage with the company evaporated? Well, evaporated a while ago, part of it, but now I think it's completely gone. And he is, the UFC, they do not have variable income anymore. It's all contracted. So the necessity of caving into Conor at all has completely vanished. And I think the evidence of that is, what he's getting on his way out. 2 fights, he'll probably get his butt kicked.
UFC 329 VIP packages are insanely priced, obviously, because that's the card Conor is headlining. But some of these packages went as high that they range from $6,500 all the way up to $20,000, and they're sold out. tell me what you think of Conor's drawing power to this day.
Well, he still can draw. They went over $30 million at a potential gate when he was going to fight Chandler, remember?
Mm-hmm.
Before they had to refund a bunch of tickets. So there's still interest in him. On top of that, the company, TKO's UFC, have perfected ticket sales to maximize them, how much they can get for the gate. So you have that benefit. So you have Conor McGregor still has interest. He has an opponent that is not just an empty suit B-side. It's an opponent with a fan base that probably draws not nearly as much as Conor, but it's something like when he fought Nate Diaz, that there's interest in the fight, this opponent. That increases the value of the tickets. You then, on top of that, you have just the mastery of ticket sales of how to release a certain number to just push up the prices high as possible with TKO. And then finally, there's the other thing is that they're coming out of the White House event. And I wonder how much that the White House event is driving very wealthy people to decide to make an appearance at a UFC event, almost as a chance to mingle and rub elbows with each other. And I think that's the other possibility.
To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!